Armies may disappear in deserts, but what about entire languages or entire peoples? What if the stories we tell today are built on voices that no one can hear anymore? In this video, we're exploring three mysteries: a script no one can read, a people who may never have existed, and a philosopher who might not have been real at all. In the farthest corner of the Pacific, on a tiny volcanic island dotted with giant stone heads, a few wooden tablets were found etched not with images or art, but with something else: a script, a system of glyphs, a language, maybe, but no one can read it. This is the mystery of Rongorongo, the undeciphered script of Easter Island known to its people as Rapa Nui, and if it truly encodes language, it could be one of the only independently invented writing systems in human history. But what makes Rongorongo haunting isn't just that we can't read it, it's that we may never be able to. Let's rewind. European missionaries first encountered the script in the 1860s. When they arrived, they saw carved wooden tablets in the homes of some Rapa Nui elders. These weren't decorative. They seemed purposeful rows of glyphs organized in tight lines, carved with obsidian or shark teeth. At the time, some locals still claimed to understand the glyphs, but within just a few years devastated by disease, slaving raids, and religious conversion, those who held the knowledge were gone. By the 1870s, there was no one left who could read them. The writing system, if that's what it was, had become a ghost of its own meaning. Only about 24 Rongorongo artifacts survive today, scattered across museums around the world. Each tablet contains between a few hundred and several thousand glyph shapes resembling humans, animals, plants, tools, and abstract forms in total. Around 15,000 glyphs have been catalogued, but their meaning remains completely opaque. There are no bilingual texts, no Rosetta Stone, no clear sentence structure, nothing to tie them to a known language with confidence. So what is Rongorongo? The debate begins here. Some scholars argue that Rongorongo represents a true writing system, a native form of script that encoded the old Rapa Nui language in full linguistic detail. If so, that would place it alongside only a handful of other independently invented scripts in history: Sumerian cuneiform, Egyptian hieroglyphs, Chinese logograms, and Mesoamerican glyphs. Others suggest a more conservative interpretation that Rongorongo was a mnemonic device, not true writing, but a symbolic aid used to memorize oral chants, genealogies, or ritual stories. Under this theory, the glyphs aren't linguistic symbols in the full sense, but visual cues in a rhythm-based, priestly tradition. There's a key clue here: nearly every known Rongorongo tablet was found among elite households or ceremonial figures, not among everyday tools or widespread usage. It was likely a restricted knowledge system, passed down among a literate class, possibly only the Cherokee chiefs, priests, or scribes. Which brings us to a chilling possibility. The last people who could read Rongorongo may have intentionally kept it secret even as their world collapsed. In one account, a bishop in the 1860s tried to get an elderly Rapa Nui man named Mitoro Tawa Ure to read the tablets aloud. Mitoro began chanting, but each time he read the same tablet, the chant was different. His recitations were inconsistent, confusing, and often unrelated to the visible glyphs. Was he bluffing, misinformed, or simply unwilling to reveal sacred knowledge to a foreign priest? Another man, Ure Vai Iko, claimed that the king of Rapa Nui could read Rongorongo, but that the knowledge had died with him. He remembered certain chants, but couldn't match them to glyphs. One chant he recited was a creation story, suggesting the texts may have contained cosmology and origin myths, not administrative records, in my view. This distinction matters, because if Rongorongo was used to record spiritual or mythic knowledge, then its loss wasn't just a linguistic tragedy, it was a cultural death. It wasn't just the loss of an alphabet. It was the silence of an entire world view. Let's talk decipherment. In the 1950s, German scholar Thomas Barthel identified a repeated sequence of glyphs on one tablet and suggested it represented a lunar calendar, with glyphs corresponding to moon phases. This breakthrough hinted at astronomical knowledge and confirmed that the symbols were patterned and meaningful. But even this one insight hasn't unlocked the rest of the script. Why? Because there are so few surviving examples, fewer than 30 full inscriptions. No modern Rapa Nui speaker can read them. And the spoken Rapa Nui language itself has shifted under outside influence since the 19th century. Even if the base language of Rongorongo was Old Rapa Nui, that version is now gone. Add to that the complex writing direction called reverse baustrophodon, where you read one line left to right, the next right to left, and rotate the tablet 180 degrees with each line. This makes decipherment even more difficult without a known baseline. Some believe Rongorongo might not encode sound at all, but symbolic meaning or numerical rhythms. It's more like a visual mantra than a sentence, which opens up an entirely different problem. What if Rongorongo was never meant to be read but only to be remembered? There's something deeply poetic about this. Imagine a culture that encoded its sacred knowledge not for mass reading, but for preservation in ritual, not to spread language, but to protect it, not to be shared, but to be earned. In that light, Rongorongo becomes something more than a lost script. It becomes a mirror, a challenge, a reminder that writing isn't always about visibility, it's about trust. And here's the real tragedy. Many Rongorongo tablets were destroyed during early missionary activity. Some were burned, others taken and lost. A few were carved over or reused. It wasn't just time that erased the system. It was us, even today. Attempts to crack the code continue, but progress is slow. Modern computers have mapped recurring patterns, and a few glyph sequences show internal structure, but we still don't know the meaning of a single word with certainty. So the question remains, is Rongorongo the key to understanding an isolated civilization that once mastered navigation, astronomy, and monumental art? Or is it a closed door sealed by time, loss, and secrets no longer spoken in a world full of data? Algorithms, and endless text. This little collection of carved lines on wood reminds us of something we forget, that knowledge can vanish, and when it does, it doesn't always leave a translation behind. Long before Europeans arrived in North America, the Cherokee spoke of a strange people who came before them, beings with pale skin, large eyes, and a terrible sensitivity to sunlight. They lived underground. They emerged only at night, and they vanished after a great battle. The Cherokee called them the moon-eyed people. To the modern eye, it sounds like folklore, a creation myth. Maybe. But the details don't sit still. Over time, archaeologists, fringe theorists, and even nationalists have all taken a shot at answering the question, who were they? And perhaps more chillingly, did they ever really exist? Let's start at the source. The legend of the moon-eyed people was first recorded in 1797 when Benjamin Smith Barton, a physician and naturalist, documented an oral tradition from the Cherokee, according to this story. When the Cherokee migrated into the Appalachian region, they found it already occupied by a mysterious race. These people were said to be short, fair-skinned, and nocturnal, so sensitive to sunlight that they couldn't function during the day. The Cherokee eventually drove them out during a full moon, when their advantage in darkness was lost. That's the core of the story. But as with any good legend, the deeper you go, the more versions you find. In 1782, John Sevier, the first governor of Tennessee, claimed that a Cherokee chief told him the moon-eyed people were white and had crossed the ocean long before Columbus. They built stone fortifications, spoke a strange language, and were eventually conquered. Sevier's account is complicated. He was both a soldier and a politician with a history of conflict with the Cherokee. Some scholars believe he may have manipulated the story to justify expansionist policies, recasting Native Americans not as original inhabitants, but as conquerors of an earlier, perhaps even European, group. But let's assume the story is older than politics. Let's ask, what might explain this legend? There are several leading theories. Theory 1. Descendants of pre-Columbian European explorers. Some believe the Moon-Eyed People were Welsh colonists, descended from Prince Madoc, a semi-legendary figure said to have sailed from Wales to the Americas in the 12th century, centuries before Columbus. The idea was popularized in the 18th and 19th centuries, often used to justify European claims to American land. Supporters pointed to stories of blue-eyed Native Americans, stone walls in Georgia, and unusual inscriptions. But there's a problem. There's no solid archaeological evidence for any Welsh colony in the Americas prior to European contact. The Fort Mountain Wall in Georgia, sometimes linked to Madoc, is more plausibly the work of indigenous mound-building cultures, like the Hopewell or Adena. So while the theory is romantic and politically convenient, it doesn't hold up to scrutiny. Theory 2, Norse, Phoenicians, or other early visitors. Variants of this theory suggest the Moon-Eyed People were Norse explorers from Greenland or Vinland, or even Phoenicians who somehow crossed the Atlantic. These explanations usually rely on linguistic clues, questionable inscriptions, or unusual physical traits in certain burial sites. But again, there's little evidence. And more importantly, why would these people be light-sensitive? Why would they live underground? This brings us to a more grounded possibility. Theory 3. Indigenous peoples with unique lifestyles. Some archaeologists suggest the Moon-Eyed People were a remnant of earlier indigenous cultures, possibly the Adena or Hopewell peoples, known for building mounds and stone fortifications in the eastern woodlands of North America. These groups flourished between 1000 BCE and 500 CE, long before the Cherokee arrived in the Appalachians, if they had lighter skin due to less sun exposure, or if they used subterranean dwellings or ceremonial structures. They may have appeared alien to later arrivals, over time. Real encounters could have evolved into mythic memory, the others becoming something ghost-like, especially if they had rituals involving the night, or symbols tied to the moon, in this reading. The Moon-Eyed People weren't moon-born. They were simply forgotten ancestors absorbed into legend. Theory 4. Miners or settlers misinterpreted. Another theory is that the Cherokee may have encountered early European miners, perhaps Spanish or English, who traveled inland from the coast, lived in rough underground shelters, and worked at night to avoid heat or conflict. Imagine this. You're a Cherokee scout. It's the 1600s. You see a group of pale-skinned, strangely dressed people emerging from a cave at dusk, blinking into the half-light, their eyes wide, their movements nervous. Wouldn't you call them moon-eyed, this theory? While more mundane, is deeply plausible and deeply eerie in its way. But what if we're asking the wrong questions? What if the point isn't whether the Moon-Eyed People were real? But why does the story persist, in my view? This legend tells us more about the psychology of arrival than about any specific historical group. The idea of finding someone already here different, unsettling, and then erased is a repeating motif in human storytelling. You see it in ancient Sumerian myths about displaced gods, in British tales of the Picts and the Fair Folk, in African and Polynesian oral traditions about long-lost first peoples. It reflects a deep human fear that we are not the first, that we are not the rightful heirs, that history is a palimpsest, and under our story lies someone else's. The Moon-Eyed People, in this sense, become not just a mystery but a symbol of erasure, a people too different to understand, too inconvenient to remember. So we mythologize them. We push them underground literally and figuratively. And then we wonder why the past feels so silent, even today. The Moon-Eyed People continue to inspire everything from speculative books to New Age websites to tourist plaques, at Fort Mountain State Park in Georgia. A historical marker even nods to the legend suggesting that the nearby stone wall may have been built by mysterious white people from the east. But here's the truth. We don't know who built the wall. We don't know who the moon-eyed people were. We don't know if they were real, misremembered, or metaphorical. All we know is that they came before, and then they were gone. He's one of the most influential figures in Western thought. He changed how we understand ethics, knowledge, and truth, and yet he never wrote anything down. Everything we know about Socrates, his philosophy, his methods, even his personality comes from the words of others, namely his students, his enemies, and a few ancient playwrights. He left no writings, no letters, no teachings in his hand, nothing. So here's the question. No one wants to ask out loud. Was Socrates even real, or was he a character, a voice, a convenient vessel for other people's ideas? Let's step into Athens, 5th century BCE, a war-torn democracy, grappling with political upheaval, cultural transition, and the growing pains of early rationalism. In this turbulent landscape appears a barefoot man, unkempt, strange, yet charismatic. He roams the agora, questioning everything and everyone, challenging generals, poets, craftsmen, even young nobles. This man doesn't claim to know the truth. Instead, he claims to know only that he knows nothing. That man is Socrates, or at least, that's who we've been told he is. The primary source we have on Socrates is Plato, his most famous student. Plato adored him. He made Socrates the main character in nearly all his philosophical dialogues, Apology, Phaedo, Republic, Credo, and more. But here's where things get tricky. In Plato's earlier works, Socrates is a questioner, humble, probing, skeptical. He dismantles others' beliefs but never offers clear doctrines of his own. In Plato's later works, however, Socrates suddenly becomes a mouthpiece for complex theories about metaphysics, politics, and cosmology. He describes ideal states, eternal forms, and abstract realities that feel more Platonic than Socratic. So who are we hearing the teacher or the student? To other ancient sources paint wildly different portraits. Xenophon, a soldier and historian who also knew Socrates, gives us a very different man, practical, conservative, morally upright. Socrates in Xenophon's writings is less of a philosopher and more of a wise uncle advising about property and household management. Then there's Aristophanes, a comic playwright, who mocks Socrates in his play, The Clouds. In it, Socrates is portrayed as a pompous sophist who teaches nonsense, measuring flea jumps, and helping young men avoid paying debts through clever argument. This play was performed while Socrates was still alive. It was meant to satirize real people, and it contributed to Socrates' public image as a corrupter of youth, a charge that eventually led to his death sentence. So, let's tally this up. In Plato, Socrates is a philosophical hero. In Xenophon, he's a moral teacher. In Aristophanes, he's a laughingstock. And in the actual Athenian court, he's condemned to death. Which version is real? Or are they all shadows of a man who may never have existed as we imagine? Historians overwhelmingly agree that Socrates was a real person. He's referenced in too many independent sources, by name, by character, and in specific historical events. The trial and execution of Socrates in 399 BCE is considered a verified historical fact, the charge impiety, and corrupting the youth of Athens. But here's the twist. Even if Socrates was real, was the Socrates we know just a literary construct? This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a serious academic debate known as the Socratic problem, the challenge of separating the historical Socrates from the fictionalized versions written by others. In my view, Socrates was very likely a real man. But what we call Socratic philosophy is a layered performance, a mixture of memory, myth, and rhetorical framing. Think of him like a mosaic pieces of history held together by the glue of imagination. Let's consider motivation. Why would Plato use Socrates as a character even in dialogues that propose theories Plato likely invented? Because Socrates was safe cover. He had already been martyred. By framing controversial or radical ideas as Socratic, Plato could explore political and metaphysical risks while shielding himself from backlash, and as a rhetorical tool. Socrates the character was brilliant, endlessly curious, witty, elusive, a perfect narrator for philosophy. It's worth noting that Aristotle, Plato's student, distinguishes between Socrates and Plato. He attributes some ideas directly to Plato, even when they appear in the mouth of Socrates in the dialogues. So even in antiquity, readers knew the difference. But this leads to a deeper point. Even if we can't pin down the real Socrates, does it matter? Because here's what's unique. Socrates wasn't just teaching what to think. He was teaching how to think. His method, asking questions, exposing contradictions, pushing people to define their beliefs, remains at the core of philosophy, education, and even modern critical thinking. So maybe the mystery isn't that we can't find the true Socrates. Maybe the mystery is how a man with no books, no title, and no army became immortal anyway. And yet, there's still something haunting in his absence. We don't know his voice. We don't know what he wrote because he didn't. We only have echoes, written by people who had their motives in that way. Socrates becomes a mirror. Each author saw in him what they needed: a teacher, a trickster, a martyr, a mask, and we do the same, even today. Socrates is quoted in TED Talks, corporate seminars, and memes. He's invoked by revolutionaries and conservatives alike. Everyone claims him. No one owns him. And perhaps that's the point. Maybe Socrates didn't just challenge Athenian norms. Maybe he challenges ours, too. He reminds us that truth is slippery, that knowledge isn't something you hold, it's something you chase. And the moment you stop questioning, you lose the one thing Socrates never wrote down, but always lived by: wisdom. A lost language, a forgotten people, a philosopher who lives only through the words of others. Which of these do you think hides the deepest truth? Drop your thoughts in the comments, I read them all. And if you thought these mysteries were strange. The final video in this series will take us from political assassinations to sacred relics to the death of one of history's most feared legends. Hit subscribe so you'll be there when it premieres.